Hello everyone, welcome to Behind the Scenes episode. Today I'm excited to invite Ananth Narayanan, CEO of Medlife. I had known Ananth from his days at Myntra and look forward to talking about his contributions in building both these companies. Thanks Ananth for making the time to talk to us on your behind the scenes journey.
Thank you, Vani.
Ananth, the founder professional CEO equation, making that work is unusual. And there are not many instances where there are great success stories from that. I'd love to hear from you how and what it takes to make this work.
Great question. So, I think, Vani, a few things worked for us, I think, at Myntra. And I would say some of it is luck and some of it can be engineered, right? I think the biggest one actually to start with is a soft factor of trust. So one thing that worked, and I think this is more founder driven than the professional CEO driven, is I think Mukesh was incredible in how he, what was his baby, right? Allowing someone else to take control of that and to allow them to make decisions, both good and bad ones, I think takes a lot of maturity and I think takes a lot of trust. So trust is one important element. I think the second one from the professional CEO standpoint is being very clear about expectations. What is success? And I think I took the first 30 days to say, here is what success would be, which is, positive unit economics in 2 months, X scale, Y burn, blah, blah, blah in 12 months, etc. Right? And I think getting that right is important. That's the second bucket in my mind. Expectations with the founder. And then also, by the way, in this case, since it was an extended Flipkart board with the board, I think that was the second piece. I think that really worked. And the third is, by the way, understanding what are the freedoms to make and not make decisions. So in my case, by the way, with him, I was very clear, right? I mean, he had a strong team, but I think I had a set of beliefs on how the team needed to perform, and I made changes. And I think very clear about what you can and cannot do and what are sensitive spots. So I think these are the three elements for me: trust, clear expectations in terms of performance, which is mutually agreed on. And three is sort of figuring out what are the holy cow things that you want to touch and not touch and be very clear about it, right?
Ananth, you are known for your scaling prowess, as we just talked about, something that most startups, as you know, really struggle with. They have a great product. How do they scale it? Now, do you have a few key principles or tricks that work for scaling that others could learn from and take away?
I don't know if there's a trick, but here are a few of the things, right? The first, I think, is to have a almost impossible goal. So Myntra was about 275 million, if you remember correctly, when the acquisition happened, right? 275, 300 sort of million, right? 330 million, right? So I think I had gone out and said, by the way, that in 2 years, which didn't quite happen, but in 2 years, we'll be $1 billion. Right. And for me, I think being $1 billion business was important, right? So actually having an ambition, which you can then convince your board and your people is really important. Having a vision and a scale that is exciting and can be explained in the terms that appeal to both investors and people, I think is the first step of the process, right? Because then everybody sort of oriented. I think the second is sort of taking that sort of bigger picture 2-year goal and breaking it down and over exceeding your targets in the first 2 quarters or 3 quarters, so that then the board gives you extra resourcing and allows you to make decisions. Right? And I think that's really important. See, one of the big things that the board allowed was the Jabong acquisition. And the reason that happened is we actually exceeded every number, both top line and bottom line, for the first 4 quarters. Right? And therefore, there was a lot of confidence. So you have to start with a big, hairy goal, but then you have to break it down into something that you actually exceed what you commit to the board. Right? And I think that gives a lot of confidence and then a lot of leeway from the board to make this happen. That's the second. I think the third is hiring money, right? I think to go from a $300 million business to a $1.2, $1.3 billion business, which is where we left, where at least when I left, right? Takes a different kind of team. You need to keep the entrepreneurialism, but you need to start thinking system and process.
What are the common mistakes you have made in hiring and learned from?
Yeah, I think the first is, by the way, recognizing that you're never going to get 100% right. I think if you have a 70% hit rate in my mind, With senior hires, it's great. One of the lessons I think I learned is if you make a mistake, correct it quickly. Don't wait and give, make it painful for both the senior person you've hired and for yourself for 12, 14, 24 months, saying every quarter something will be better. Usually, you know, within the first quarter whether this is going to work culturally and skills wise. Very quickly sort of make that call, right? That's one. Second is zero tolerance for cultural misfits. I think in particular, Myntra, by the way, taught me that because I think Myntra had an incredibly great culture. I think is a Mukesh legacy, but I also fundamentally believe in it, right? In the sense, I think only great culture companies really succeed long term. And if you have a cultural misfit, again, I haven't made, I have often traded off competence for culture. And I think that idea, after you feel the effects of it after a year and a half, right? The performance improves with health deteriorates, right? So two things I've learned. One is a trick, which is I make sure that every senior hire and invite with the family for dinner and spend 4 hours. And I think that makes a huge difference in understanding the person and their values.
What's your advice on a process to handle pivots successfully?
Let me talk about it two ways. The first is how do you do it, and the second is there a process to it, right? On the how you do it, at least the way I have done it, Bani, right, is I actually think in a startup type environment. So I think thinking about 1 to 2 quarter, having very clear sort of a view to what are the big shifts to make. These are not operating performance parameters. So I'll give you a Myntra example and I'll give you a Medlife example. The Myntra example was we discovered, probably not fast enough, but the cosmetic and beauty segment was growing very rapidly, and Nykaa was making rapid strides, right? And therefore decided that we would launch Myntra Beauty. Now, I think that could have been done quicker, but we actually that came out of an actual process where we kept scanning the environment for market data, saying what are the segments that are growing versus not. I mean, this is not a consulting type thing, but literally you sort of see where is the growth happening and what do you do, right? And we did that as a leadership team, almost religiously every quarter, but if not, at least every 2 quarters. And I think that worked well. And I think the onus here is on the CEO to do it. I mean, you can get your chief of staff and whatever strategy team to help you, but the reality of it is this is your call, right? You have to make it. By the way, the same thing came about and why we did Jabong, because I think the reality of it was we thought that market consolidation would help, right? So if I take a Medlife example now, right, and here it's sort of live and going, right? One of the biggest changes we're seeing is I think the top of the funnel on consultations changing dramatically, right? So you're sort of a medicine delivery diagnostic player where suddenly the top of the funnel in consultation is changing. So how do you form partnerships quickly? And how do you get the top of the funnel into Medlife has been a very important thing, right? And therefore that's one pivot. Another pivot is as regulations change, right? And discontinuities happen, right? Whether it's around private label, in the healthcare space or whatever else, taking quick advantage of it. The way at least I do it is I spend about a day every quarter trying to sort of understand externally. And the way I do it is very simple. You call up 2 or 3 research companies, you call up a consulting firm, you call up this, you just the key is to spend the day. And you get somebody to organize enough data and you just read through stuff and talk to 5 to 7 to 10 people, right? I mean, it's no more scientific than that. And usually what happens is you get quickly what are the 2, 3, 5 things that you need to look out for. Then typically I get somebody on the team to do some staff work, no more than a week. Say what is the opportunity, etc. And then we usually debate it in the leadership team to say, is this something that's worth taking a bet on? And most importantly there, who's the one person who's going to anchor the bet for 6 months, right? Sometimes it's me, as in the case of deals, but in other times it can be somebody else, right? So I think doing that process really helps on the pivot and it makes it a bit more systematic, right? I mean, there are some people who have flashes of brilliance, Vani, right? If you don't have those flashes of brilliance, I think this process works.
What was the process and thinking in your career shifts and in this journey for you?
I think some of it is opportunistic, but I'll tell you what I looked for, right? I think the theme on all of it actually, by the way, was learnability. I spent 15 years at McKinsey, but I never did more than 3 years in one geography. So I did Cleveland, Shanghai, Chicago, Chennai, right? I mean, and I changed that every 3 years. And the reason is I think if you sort of keep yourself in an uncomfortable situation and you keep learning new themes, then you grow much faster as a leader. So it was always a learnability theme, right? Even in the McKinsey thing. I did not decide to leave McKinsey. I had actually just made senior partner. So most people would not leave after making it because generally then you have a longer tenure and so on, right? And you work your way up the pyramid. Um, the Myntra was an incoming opportunity, right? Which is, I think with Mukesh moving to Flipkart, there was a question. I think two ways I thought about it, Bunny, right? I sort of think about it as a little bit as, do you regret something that you won't do, right? And I felt like, while all the current markers said leaving McKinsey was both a financially and professionally risky move after the 15 years of effort, it felt like if I did not take the Myntra plunge, I would regret it 5 years later, right? So that was the single biggest sort of decision for me in terms of saying I'll do Myntra. So it was no more than that. I think there were only very simple themes for me. Is it a large industry? Can you build $1 billion business? The answer was yes. Second, is it people that you like and you feel like you can work with? The answer was yes, actually, across Mukesh, Sachin, and BD, right? And third is, do you feel like you will grow and learn as a leader and will it stretch you? And the answer, the third one is absolutely yes, since I had no clue of fashion or tech or any of it, right? I tried to be more systematic post Myntra, right? And the reason, by the way, I think when I moved on from Myntra was, I think after the Walmart acquisition, it seemed like the right thing to go out and try something new, right? I wanted to do something even more entrepreneurial and even more risky. So Medlife was, Medlife, just to give you a sense, is a $150 million business. So it's not dramatically small, but it was something where I actually had a clean cap table. I could invest into it. I could sort of be more founder-like, even more than in Myntra. And here, the only other thing that I thought through was, I said, if I wanted to do something next, I wanted both scale and some form of societal impact. So the three industries I considered were agriculture, banking, especially sort of rural, and healthcare. Because in addition to building a business, you would actually create hopefully a positive impact on society at large, right? And the way I think about career itself is, I think most people think too much around sort of what will I do 10 years later? I think the reality of it is it's very hard to predict. I think basically thinking about 2-year chunks is the right way to think about it. And the way at least I think about it is less around financial role, etc., and more around what is the next set of learnings that I would do. Right? I mean, the others obviously have to work, right? But the biggest criteria is learning and people you enjoy working with. If you get those two right, then mostly you move forward.
What's your framework of risk assessment?
Yeah. So the way I look at risk, I think is maybe threefold, Vani, right? The first is, I think, opportunity cost, right? And sort of what can I do? It's a time-based risk, right? How long do I give of my life into this opportunity? I think that's one, right? So is it a 2-year bet, 5-year bet, 1-year bet, right? And I think those are very different levels of risk for me. Right? That's sort of one way I think about it. The second way I think about it is it's a little bit of the financial planning. I think somebody one of my mentors in McKinsey told me, you need to sort of calculate the amount of money that you need to be able to say, I can do whatever I want and I'm able to walk out of any situation, right? Once you have that, then you sort of make much better calls in terms of what you want to do and what you say yes to and no to, right? And I sort of got to that point, luckily touch wood, with McKinsey, right? And therefore being able to take, the right calls is the second, right? The third is, by the way, reputational risk, right? Which again, by the way, at least, you're sort of professional CEO, founder, etc., right? I think the reality of it is we are all at some level professionals. And I think our reputations are all that we have at the end of the day, right? I mean, both for ourselves and otherwise. So I sort of usually do a fair amount of diligencing on the people that you associate with to make sure that you're not taking a huge reputational risk, right? I think businesses can go sideways, but at least make sure that the reputational risk part is somewhat protected, right? So I look at all those three in terms of risks, right? And the last, by the way, is a bit more philosophical, Vani, right? Because my view is, look, success and failure both come in cycles, right? And I think all of these will continue to happen. I think the way at least I think about it is, even as I go through a bad cycle, one, I don't know if it's a risk, but it's a factor for me is, am I enjoying myself today? Right? You may still be stressed out, but are you at least solving a problem? Are you sort of working with people that support you, etc.? If the answer is no to that, no amount of risk is worth, right?
What is it intrinsically that allows you to take on sectors that you are not entrenched in and, really be phenomenally successful at it?
So I don't know about the phenomenal success, but I'll tell you how I sort of figure out the learnability. So I think the theme is, I think, learnability. And the question is, how do you do it? Right? I think the first, Vani, is to sort of acknowledge what you don't know. Being very clear and transparent about what you know and what you don't know is very important. And I think pretending to know things when you don't is very dangerous, right? I think that's one important thing to say, what I don't know, what I do know, right? And being transparent with everybody around it. The second is, I think, taking a systematic effort to learn. I've visited now, I think probably more factories than Mukesh has, right? I've been to at least 3 denim factories, 2 shirt factories. I mean, I actually go and I've sort of seen now end to end how the supply chain works. So spending time to understand it is important, right? And I think you can work a learning schedule into your first 90 days, right? Which includes site visits, includes talking to customers, includes actually visiting and understanding the supply chain in a little bit more detail, right? And all of those are very easy to do if you actually do it in a systematic and planned manner. Having a learning plan is important. Being upfront with people that what you don't know and not being arrogant about knowing everything is important, right? I think, and then the last is, I think, listening. So how do you be effective is you have to ask questions. Most times anyway, even if you're from the industry, you don't know all the answers. But if you're not from the industry, it's even easier. And actually, I think it's an advantage because I think you ask the more obvious questions that people are afraid to ask. And you find that actually there are more innovative and new things to do.
I very much enjoyed our conversation here, Ananth, and thank you so much for taking the time, making the time to share your, inspiring journey and the key insights to draw from that. And, really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, man. Really appreciate it.